element in the system. So the vehicle is the vehicle, but it has command and control, it has communications, it really is part of a grander system. When SpaceX launches a refurbishment or replenishment satellite to go up to the International Space Station, it's not just that vessel that's going up there, it is communicating as part of the system, a larger system. So there's communications going back and forth, and maybe people are involved in it, or it's happened automatically. So when I say unmanned systems, it's a system, it's not just the vehicle. So drone, unmanned aerial system, part of a system. Communications, navigation, the GPS, all that stuff goes with it. Unmanned ground systems, same type of thing. It's not just the vehicle on the road, it has connectivity to its environment, it understands where it is. Unmanned maritime systems, the same thing. The huge investor in the advancement of unmanned systems for the past 20 years, your U.S. Department of Defense. They were the big heavy lifters for unmanned systems in all those operational domains, air, ground, and maritime. And he talked about the grand challenge with DARPA. That was isn't it possible that we could do this, take the people out of the vehicle? This is not transportation, think about it, it's the reverse of transportation, not transporting people. You want to get the people out of the vehicle so they're not in harm's way. The Department of Defense, unmanned aerial systems. It wasn't about transporting people, it was about getting the people out of the cockpit. So as Iran shot down the Global Hawk, you may recall, going back 3 or 4 months ago, it was like international incident, shot down the Global Hawk, you know we're going to strike Iran, and you go, wow, there was nobody in it. And so, not like a Gary Powers thing with the U-2, going back, 30 years ago. It's kind of, okay, that's kind of, we're mad at them, but, just kind of. So in unmanned systems, the Department of Defense was working on getting people out of the vehicles. Maritime vehicles, underwater. We have sea gliders and have had sea gliders that have been operational now for nearly a decade. And these sea gliders go out and do surveillance in the ocean. They get their energy from the wave action. And so the sea gliders are able to take the wave action, generate electricity, and stay out for months at a time collecting information. They'll pop up at the end of the day, transmit all the information they collected for that day, go back down, and then take a little bit more energy out of the waves. It's about getting the people out of the submarine, is where that is. We have gotten so good in unmanned systems, thanks to the funding from the Department of Defense, that now we're looking at this going, well, shoot, let's put people back in the vehicle. And you don't need to have pilots. You don't have to have drivers for the trucks and the cars. You don't have to have people on ships. And I'll give you some information. So when I talk about transportation, maritime, 90% of the global goods transported by sea. The #1 contributor to ship fires for container ships, humans. The galleys catch on fire, and you have the people on the ship smoke cigarettes. And even though there are designated smoking areas, some people don't read all, but don't smoke here, and the cigarettes go in trash cans, and so the fires are getting started. And so the maritime industry globally has recognized that the United States Navy and a couple of other navies are starting to unman their ships. Literally, there are drone ships that are operating right now. And this year will be a transit of a cargo ship from Canada to Europe. That's scheduled for next month, November. And the plan is for the cargo ships is there will be they call them pilots, for those of you who aren't familiar, they're not like aircraft pilots, but they're pilots on ships. They bring ships out of harbor, so they're on board the first mile, 2 miles, however long it takes to get them out of the harbor to the ocean. The pilot comes off the ship transits the ocean with nobody on board. It gets close to its destination, a pilot from the other location comes aboard the ship, gets on the ships and takes in the last mile. So that's where the unmanned maritime systems are going, is for pilots being on board the first mile, the last mile, but the ships do the transit with nobody on board. And there's a great effort to move that forward. So now in unmanned systems, I'm going to go back and give you sort of a quick discussion. And what I want you to understand or think about is when I talk about this revolution in transportation, think of it at 3 levels. Think globally, nationally, and locally. So I ask you to just think of those 3 levels when I make my comments. And I'm going to break it down into air, ground transportation, and we'll talk a little bit about maritime transportation. In transportation, we're talking about carrying people and or carrying goods. I'm also going to ask you to think about 3 domains besides the air, ground, and maritime. Think about, again, the global, national, local, but think about commercial, public use, or private use for your own use. Commercial, you know, you're running goods back and forth for something, you're getting paid for doing it. Public use is like deep down in Lake Nona. It's almost like a Rubik's Cube when we have this discussion. I'm going to tell you where we were in 2014, and those 3 domains, where we are now, and what it looks like we're going to be in the future. And so it's kind of a forecast. And the numbers I use for the forecast are in the public domain. No, it's not things Grant Begley makes up, so this is kind of in the public domain. And as I said earlier, as I've been involved in doing roadmaps and forecasts for well over 20 years, one thing I've learned about forecasts, they are absolutely guaranteed to always be wrong. And so we're wrong on those things. So let's look at aviation. So I'm on the board of directors for the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. Most of the Department of Defense drones that are fielded today are drones that I would lead the development of. Global Hawk, Predator, Fire Scout, Hunter, Shadow, there's a bunch of them out there. There's been some classified ones. One of the jobs I couldn't keep, I was the National Director for Stealth, Counter-Stealth Technology Policy and Advanced Programs for the Department of Defense. And so there's stuff out there, there's lots of stuff out there. And in 2014, just 5 years ago, the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International had determined that the great opportunity for the advancement of unmanned aerial systems was going to be in the commercial sector, and it was going to be for precision agriculture. And so AUVSI at the time, we had some independent analysts come in, do some research, very good research, and they made a determination that if the FAA allowed unmanned aerial systems, these UASs, integrated into the national airspace, that market value within 5 years, this is beginning in 2014, that would have a market value of nearly $800 million within 5 years. That would get us to today. And that was going to be the big move, that 80 to 90% of all unmanned aerial systems, drones, commercially operating in the U.S. were going to be for precision agriculture. Here we are today. By the way, in 2014, AUVSI really pressed Congress. Congress wrote legislation to the FAA, directing the FAA to integrate drones into the national airspace. By 2015, they still haven't done it. And so here we are today, and the market number is not $800 million. We're at about $1.6 billion, but it's not for agriculture. UPS, Amazon, they're delivering goods, by drone. This week in Virginia, the FAA allowed a small company, to start delivering meals from a shopping center to a park, very locally. But now these drones are delivering goods. The big market for the drones has been in the movie industry. It's been surveilling towers, cell phone towers. It's been surveilling bridges, construction. It's been the insurance company using the drones to go through neighborhoods and do high fidelity photos of what the roofs are in a residential community. So when the hailstorm comes through and the homeowner comes back and says, I just had that new roof put on last year. And the insurance company comes out and says, well, we have a video here, we have high definition stuff, and it says, it looks like that roof is about 25 years old. And so we're going to give you about this much money on your insurance claim. The drones are being used by police forces to do traffic accident investigation, the monitoring of the areas. Drones over the past 2 years with the hurricanes coming into Florida, the Florida responders for hurricane response are using the drones to evaluate areas before the hurricane comes in, and then to get into the areas after the hurricane comes in when the aircraft can't fly, manned aircraft can't fly. Yes, sir?
Over on at the beach, Cape Canaveral, we've hired a drone outfit to take video of the 4 condo buildings, of the roofs, to detect where are the puddles, where's water standing, and that's helped a whole lot in getting the roofs properly repaired, fixed. And
Mhm.
we've done, started that 2.5 years ago, getting the drone people to do that.
And
And
this,
yeah, there is a
yeah.
convention in the 5th or 6th of December here in town where they're looking for people to come and learn how to make money with their video drones.
Back 2008, 2009 timeframe, I was senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for unmanned warfare for drones and other things. And at that time, again, this is 2008, 2009, the commercial drone industry hadn't started to grow, but certainly the Department of Defense was realizing the value of drones. Most people errantly think that most of the drones the Department of Defense have are lethal drones, or out whacking bad guys. A very small portion of the Department of Defense drones actually have a lethal capability. They're used for surveillance, they're used for carrying payloads. And a point of interest perhaps to you is that in 2014, 5 years ago, the U.S. Department of Defense had over 12,000 drones in inventory. There were more drones in the Department of Defense inventory than there were manned aircraft. In 2014, the Air Force trained more drone pilots than manned aircraft pilots. So a tipping point in the Department of Defense. I'll give you one more data. So we're talking about drones, we'll go to transportation. In 2007, there was a little company called DJI that started in China. Now, some of you may have your little DJI drones that you can buy. You go online, you can buy them. And so this company started in 2007 in China, DJI. As most startup companies, they lost money in 2007, made their first money in 2008. By 2014, 5 years ago, they had a $500 million revenue a year. They represented about 70 to 75% of all the hobbyist drones that are sold globally. And they had a market capital valuation of $5 billion. That was 5 years ago. This year, 2019, the company has, or I'm sorry, 2018, so these are actual numbers, 2018. The company had $5 billion in revenue, and they have a market capitalization of $15 billion. And so it's just giving you some idea where this drone thing is going. But this is little drones, they're doing surveillance, they're doing pictures of residents, they're doing videos of weddings and so forth. But 5 years ago, AUVSI, in partnership with the drone industry, had a conference in San Francisco, and there was the first utterance of, couldn't you make these drones that vertical takeoff and landing, they're electrically driven, by battery, and couldn't you just make them bigger, and couldn't they carry people? Back in 2008 and 2009, when I was the senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense, we talked about using vehicles that we already had that were unmanned, these are helicopters, Schweitzer helicopters, that were carrying payload in and out of battle. And we said, couldn't we use those to go recover injured warfighters that are in a high threat environment, instead of sending a medical evacuation helicopter in and putting that crew at risk and the helicopter at risk, just send in a drone helicopter and evacuate the individuals. The pushback, this gets into culture, the pushback was significant. Grant, there's no way we're going to put a person on a drone, think about this, an unmanned helicopter, and I said, he's going to be wounded, mortally wounded, may die before they recover. We don't have to put all the other crew members at risk. That is never going to happen. That was in 2008, 2009, 2010. 2014, the commercial industry with AUVSI in San Francisco came up with this great idea. Couldn't you just make like these DJI drones bigger and we can carry people? That's brilliant. Yeah. But I would Joffrey, so different perspective, different culture. And we thought, this is 2014 when we had the first conversations, it's like the Jetsons. That might happen in maybe 15 or 20 years. As I mentioned earlier, they're flying today. In China, in UAE, in France, and the demonstration is going to happen here in the U.S. next year. They're flying today. That market, and who are the key players in that market right now? Airbus is one of the key players. Well, who's another key player? Uber. So Uber they don't own cars. They're the largest taxi company in the world, though. They're a software company. But Uber is making a big step into UAM. And the feeling is that market is going to have a value of $50 billion within 5 years, which I find almost unimaginable. And these urban air vehicles, mobility vehicles. The target, the sweet spot is they're going to travel just 25 miles. That's going to be the max range, 150 knots. Touchdown, recharge in 5 minutes, and they're shuttling somebody else. And they're just doing this from place to place to place in the urban area, just shuttling folks around. What's missing, though, is the infrastructure to charge those vehicles that fast. So you just don't have the infrastructure in place. The other thing I would offer is maybe we have the technology. Would you get into one of those vehicles and have it transport you across town? Okay, this is not a technology issue. This is a cultural issue. Would you crawl into one of those vehicles and let it shuttle you across town without a pilot on board? So again, just think about the implications. Now, well, you see some of the taxi drivers, yeah. Well, and let me touch on that point too, because the in the aviation arena, the #1 contributor to aviation mishaps, some people call them accidents, but the FAA, the industry, you keep kind, they're mishaps. The #1 contributor to mishaps in aviation, pilot error. Depending on how you do the numbers, there's different data from different agencies, different places. It's anywhere from the high 80s to the low 90%. Some of it's weather related, some is mechanical failure, but pilot error is the big one. And so if you pull the pilot out of the aircraft, you have an ability to get rid of the pilot error. Is that truly safer? And so I submit to you for transportation, this is transporting people in our not too distant future, that urban air mobility is here. And then also what's happening, transportation again, this is delivering goods. Goods are being delivered by Amazon, and Amazon is going to be a big one, and then by UPS, and then some of the not to be recognized companies that are doing this. Amazon has done a determination, and they really have been pushing hard for 5 years, that 85% of Amazon packages that are delivered within 7 miles of one of their distribution units. 7 miles, 85%. And those packages weigh less than 5 pounds. So Amazon is absolutely convinced that this is a huge opportunity for Amazon for package delivery. Think about it, 85% of their packages, you don't have to have a 3-ton truck, going down back roads and stuff like that. Little drone, drop the package off, come back, pick up another package, drop it off. The cost would come down significantly. So this is in the air domain. Drones are delivering packages today. They're doing more so internationally than they are here because of FAA regulations, rules and regulations, restrictions in the U.S. And urban air mobility is truly emerging, and just be aware and watch. We'll see where this goes.
Did you ever think about taking one of these drones for like your car and just for a family, and everybody, you could fly to the store or whatever? Landed.
There you go. Could be a business.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's probably a good segue now into ground vehicles. So let's go to ground vehicles. And 5 years ago, in 2014, aside from the grand challenge with DARPA, there was the emergence of autonomous vehicles. You may recall or not, but Google 5 years ago had Priuses that they had modified. They had LiDAR, they had software, and Google out in California, predominantly the Los Angeles area, and up in San Francisco, had these cars, these Priuses. There were a dozen Priuses, and there were a few Lexus SUVs that were involved also, were driving miles and miles and miles in city streets, back streets, in communities, collecting data with an observer on board, keeping records of how the car was behaving. And the car is doing machine learning. It's actually, it's learning, and it's feeding this information into the other cars and the small fleet. And the cars were getting better and better and better, to where Google really thought they were going to be a big dog in offering the autonomous vehicles. Google's not a car manufacturer. They're not Ford. They're not GM. But it's Google, and they saw the opportunity to move forward with these. So that was going on 5 years ago, 2014. What most folks don't realize that in 2014, there's this company called Caterpillar. And they, working in partnership with the mining industry in Australia, realized that the great big trucks that they use in mining in Australia, and these trucks, these are hauling trucks, they're the size of a 2-story building. They weigh like 400 tons, these trucks. And what Australia had realized, and through the grand challenge of DARPA and in industry, there was a realization well, shoot, these big trucks, you know, the drivers get fatigued, you know, they get crushed very easily, they have accidents, they call in sick, and so the mining industry in Australia, so a couple of big mines working in partnership with Caterpillar, said, well, we'll try a couple of these autonomous trucks. And so that was 5 years ago. They started the autonomous trucks, just experimenting with them. And the big problem they found with the autonomous trucks initially, they were too well behaved. They would go down the same place in the road all the time. They weren't weaving at all, and they were leaving big ruts in the roads. So they had to do a software modification to get the autonomous trucks to change their path going down the roads. Today, Caterpillar has delivered over 400 of these trucks. The mining industry in Australia has improved productivity by 30%. The costs have gone down significantly. Last year, within Australia, over 1 billion tons of ore, iron ore and all the ore that's mined out of Australia, they hit the 1 billion ton with autonomous trucks hauling last year. And except for a couple of small mines in Australia, all the big mines are going to the autonomous trucks with Caterpillar. And Caterpillar now is taking orders out of Brazil, out of Argentina, and they're starting to expand trucks. Now this is transportation, hauling cargo, so that's autonomous trucks. 5 years ago, again with AUVSI, we sat down with the industry. The grand challenge with DARPA was a catalyst, an ability to have the conversation. Is it possible, as Google is doing what they're doing with the Priuses, can we truly move forward and have autonomous vehicles transport us around? This is 5 years ago, 2014. Industry experts come in. Ford, GM, and the big auto dealers realized what Google was doing and realized they probably should get on the bandwagon. So investments started to increase. This is 2014. And the determination was made by experts, to include analysts from AUVSI, that probably by 2030, we would see the first autonomous cars available for us as citizens. It's going to take that long. Here we are, 2019. Beep, down in Lake Nona, transporting people. The Priuses that Google was using, last year, Google had 10 billion miles of simulation of autonomous vehicles in urban areas, in city areas, and rural areas. 10 billion miles of simulation. The auto industry global had 5 million miles of autonomous vehicle actual mileage. And the 10 billion miles simulated, the 5 million miles actual, what's the accident rate of an autonomous vehicle right now? 1 in 6 million miles. An autonomous vehicle, you'll have not a death, not a death, one accident in 6 million miles. Last year, 2018, globally, 1.32 million people died in traffic fatalities. I'll say that one more. 1.32 million people died in traffic fatalities globally. In the United States, just under 40,000. The probability of a human in the United States, putting the rest of the world aside, the probability of having an accident in the United States with a driven car, 1 in 60,000 miles. Compared to the autonomous vehicles, 1 in 6 million miles. And the autonomous vehicles are beginning to emerge right now. It is a race to get the first ones marketed. And we are going to be affected in some ways. You get a chance to be a passenger, perhaps be an owner. Where AUVSI thought we would see the first autonomous vehicles in 2030, they're coming out now. I mean, with this is within 5 years. It's absolutely phenomenal. And arguably, you probably hear Tesla offers that in fact their Tesla, the Model S and others, are fully autonomous, but then the small print is, don't sleep in your car while it's fully autonomous. You'll see people, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the video, Los Angeles freeway, guys falling asleep in his car going down the freeway in Los Angeles. So there's stepping a little bit too far on some of these things. But the forecast is that for the autonomous vehicle, ground vehicle market, right now that market has about a $250 million market valuation because some companies, and this is like deep down in Lake Nona, are producing vehicles. That market, starting 2020, is going to grow at a compounded annual growth rate of 50%, 50%. And that within 5 years, that market is going to be worth over $30 billion itself. Now here's a fundamental question. Is the technology good enough for the autonomous vehicles? Now think about this, and I would offer it is. They're out there. As a parent, would you put your children in an autonomous vehicle to go visit friends, or go to the store, or go to school? Yeah, would you do that?
No way.
And so, no way. Exactly. And I would
With your
offer.
parents, though.
Yeah. Think about it. Who's the most popular people in a retirement home? The person that still has a driver's license. So would you allow your parent, your senior parent at a retirement home, to go in an autonomous vehicle to go run errands? And so you may have different answers there, but I would offer these are cultural issues. Okay. In 2014, 9 states had proposed legislation for autonomous vehicles in the United States. 2014, 9 states had proposed legislation, including Florida, and I was leading the effort here in Florida for UBSI. Of the 9 states, none of the legislation was passed. This year, 2019, 29 states have approved legislation for autonomous vehicles in the state. The Secretary of Transportation, the national level, this year at a conference, doubled down that he was committed and he would have his team work to allow autonomous vehicles on all the national highways. One of the problems here, though, you think about the rules and regulations for autonomous vehicles for us to use. Oftentimes the rules would say, and the driver this, the driver that, the driver's responsible. We don't have a driver in the vehicle. The legislation that passed this past year in Florida is the first legislation that allows autonomous vehicles on all roads in the state of Florida with no licensed driver on board. And in that legislation it says specifically, though, that the operating system has to be insurable and certified. So now the insurance company has to certify and or insure the operating system. If you remember going back 5 or 6 years ago when the Toyotas had the runaway throttles and they couldn't determine whether it was a software issue or it was the mats or whatever, huge issue. Somebody had to be at fault, and this is sort of the legal environment we live in. But now the legislation in the state of Florida is don't have to have a licensed driver on board. None of the passengers are responsible. But in fact, it has to be an insurable system, and it has to be a certified operating system. So that's where we're going. And so I would offer. Yeah,
So in that scenario, I understand the people in the car are not responsible. Who is?
that's part of the legislation.
When the accident happens,
Is it Google?
even if it's only every 6 million miles?
If every 6 months, but there has to be somebody accountable. And in fact, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was invited to the University of Miami Law School. This is a lawyer with great big. I'm not a lawyer. And it was an international conference, again, similar to the space conference in DC a couple of months ago. There were probably about 100 invitees, and they had their CVs were impressive. And then there was Grant Begley, because I'm just involved in unmanned systems. And the lawyers, what they did is it was a 1 full week conference by invitation only, and it was any attorneys in here, lawyers? Okay, it's good to be here with family and friends. But they were trying to find, who do you sue? There has to be, who do you hold accountable? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the operator? This is where the FAA struggles with authorizing drones into national airspace. If the drone is operated by an individual, that individual then is going to be responsible and accountable for that drone, like a pilot. And
It's almost like it's the software. The quality of that software is going to determine how well it functions.
so as this is a discussion,
So
one
who
of
wrote
the
the
big things.
software? They-
Well, and being an aviator, one of the big things, any aviators in here, you have your private license, commercial license. So one of the big things in aviation is the rule, see and be seen. I mean, that's the big thing in aviation.
You have a pilot.
And so the argument is, well, how can the drone see? And one of the things in the industry has been asserted for quite some time is the drone can have cameras all the way around the drone. I mean, actually see 360 and see with much greater fidelity than a human can. The FAA goes, nah, that doesn't count. We don't care. And the human, I mean, if you've ever piloted an aircraft, depending on the aircraft, you may be looking through a little window over here, you have a high wing, you can't see anything up here. And a lot of the aviation mishaps are because the pilot just can't see because he or she is in this very restricted space. But where the obstacles is the rules and regulations, see and be seen, The drones can't see like humans can. I would assert they can see better than humans can because you can do panoramic views, and that's been demonstrated many, many times, but that's just not good enough. But your point about culture, legislation, rules, and regulations. So for the driverless cars, I would offer that they are coming. They're coming quickly. The U.S. Department of Transportation realizes that there's rules and regulations that is inhibiting the advancement of driverless cars for us. Each state has its own rules and regulations. So you have the overarching Department of Transportation. This is like unlike the FAA. The FAA is responsible for the airspace, and the states are not supposed to make their own airspace rules. Some do, particularly in the area of drones, to include Florida. But in driving for cars and for trucks, at the national level, there's national rules that flow down, and then the states can make their own rules and regulations. The thing is being realized, for example, Florida can authorize driverless cars. You may be able to go get your autonomous vehicle and have it in your garage. You own it. It's not a public use vehicle like the Beat down in Lake Nona. You may jump in your autonomous vehicle and say, I think I'm going to go see my family up in Georgia. Georgia doesn't have authorization for autonomous vehicles, so you're stuck in Florida. So just an example. So these are rules and regulations. Culture and policy are the inhibitors to moving forward with the unmanned systems, the future of transportation. On trucks, and I'll wrap up here.
Speaking of that, I hear there's a little problem with the 18-wheeler going back and forth across Florida, that they'll pull into a gas station and nobody comes out and puts gas in there.
Yeah. Here's one of the excellent points. So here's one of the things that, as an example, has been realized just this past year with the emergence of more unmanned vehicles, autonomous cars on the roads. So as pedestrians, if you go to a crosswalk, or even if there's not a crosswalk, you walk up, you're down at the store, and a car comes up and starts slowing down. What do? Normally you look at the vehicle, you make eye contact with the driver, and kind of that little, unacknowledged, a little head nod. You go, yeah, okay, he sees me, I see him, I'm okay, I'm just going to walk across. What's been realized is, autonomous vehicle comes up, there's no driver. And so that a pedestrian, think about yourself as a pedestrian, you see this vehicle come up. How many times do you see a vehicle approach, that has nobody in it, or passengers in the back, and there's nobody in the front? So now what's the human interaction for the pedestrian? And so you get a standoff, and this is what has happened. So a car that's now driven by a person, a driver, behind the autonomous vehicle, realizes the autonomous vehicle is slowing down. You look through the back window, there's nobody in that car. Not realizing the car is slowing down for a pedestrian, not realizing the pedestrian is now apprehensive because he or she can't see, there's nobody in the car. And so now with the pedestrian, you get this little pookie dance, who's going to go, and the car will stop and wait for the pedestrian to cross, about in time for the car behind it to become upset and whip around it and hit the pedestrian. So now, what's being realized, this is not just on occasion, this is all through the 10 billion miles of modeling and simulation of 5 million miles. It's put a little marquee on the front, a ticker tape on the front of the car, I see you. And then on the back of the car, slowing for pedestrian. But these are things that are being discovered now as we're moving forward. How do you get these autonomous vehicles even safer and more accepted? And it's culture, it's going to be discovery, and the future is coming.
Because they don't have road rage.
They don't have road rage.
And they don't take drugs.
Yeah.
And we know it.
Yes, ma'am.
So I work for the Department of Transportation working for Florida's Turnpike. Are you familiar with the SunTrax?
SunTrax. Oh, I love it. You want to do a shout out? I'll do a shout out.
No, you can do a shout out. Go ahead.
SunTrax, Florida Turnpike.
That's what he mentioned.
What's it? National Association Business Group or whatever. But it's a private-public effort with the Florida Turnpike and the funds they collect with the Florida Turnpike. And in Polk County, it's called SunTrax, T-R-A-X, and it's the first designated solely for use purpose for autonomous vehicles for demonstration, experimentation. Phase 1 was completed May of this year. It's a 2.25 mile track. And big oval track, I think for the straightaways is like 5 lanes wide. And the phase 1 was $40 or $45 million for phase 1, and they've now started phase 2, which is about $100 million for phase 2. And the purpose for this track started going back about 5 years ago. It was to help Florida Turnpike introduce new technology onto the Florida Turnpike in 2014. Within that time frame came the realization of these autonomous vehicles are coming. We need to make this for the autonomous trucks, for the autonomous cars. And so now it is the first dedicated state-backed entity to do other experimentation, but for the driverless trucks and the driverless cars. And pretty darn impressive. And that's here in our state. So I would applaud and thank you very much for bringing that up. That's awesome. Yeah. So where we are in autonomous ground vehicles, they are coming. So be prepared and think about your own willingness, whether you're going to allow them in your family and your life and how you would use them. We talked about unmanned air mobility or the urban air mobility. They're coming too. To a lesser degree, and let's go to the trucks for example. In 2018 in the United States, there were 500,000 truck drivers too few. 500,000 too few truck drivers in the U.S. Why? They could get better jobs. Transportation, the economy was improving. There was more demand for truck drivers. There was more movement of goods. But 500,000 truck drivers too few in the United States in 2018. And as mentioned before, 70% of the goods in the United States are transported over land by trucks. And so this is another effort, and I would offer, how do you forecast in the future, in another 5 years, where the trucking industry is going to be with autonomous trucks? If, as with us, drivers of our cars, the #1 contributor to fatalities, accidents, humans, drivers, it's human error. Being drunk, not paying attention, texting, not paying attention, run a stop sign, run a red light. We hear about it every morning, turn on the news, accident on I-4, accident here, it's human error. The wheels aren't falling off the vehicles, it's humans running into stuff. So if you can get the humans out of it, this is going to be helpful. And so now to trucks, what's the #1 cause of accidents in the trucking industry? Truck drivers. So could they be safer? And the analysis indicates yes. And so we're 500,000 truck drivers short in 2018. Where are we going to be in another 5 years? I think there's going to be a lot of investment. And the biggest investors in driverless trucks, Uber, again.